Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the keeper of sacred weapons. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was gray. It wasn't a meteorological observation. The sun was a brilliant, almost defiant orb in the afternoon sky, casting sharp-edged shadows that danced with the sway of city life. But for Izuku Midoriya, the color had bled out of everything. The vibrant reds of hero billboards, the cheerful blues of storefront awnings, the lush green of park trees, all had been desaturated by the weight of 5 simple words. You need to be realistic. The words echoed in the hollow space where his 14-year-old dreams had lived and breathed only an hour ago. They hadn't been spoken with malice. They had been delivered with a sigh of weary kindness, a sad sort of pity from the one man he had idolized above all others. All Might. The symbol of peace. His hero. The clatter of his own red shoes on the concrete stairs felt unnaturally loud, each step a hammer blow against the fragile silence in his skull. He clutched the strap of his yellow backpack, his knuckles white. Inside, nestled amongst his textbooks, was Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The cover was slightly warped from where the sludge villain had engulfed it, the pages still faintly damp. The autograph, a bold, confident scrawl from All Might himself, felt like a cruel joke, a signature on the death certificate of his aspirations. It's not wrong to dream. But, the most destructive word in any language, he'd almost done it. On the rooftop, after the skeletal, withered form of Toshinori Yagi had confessed his secret, Izuku had almost hurled the notebook over the edge. He'd almost let the wind carry away the hundreds of hours of meticulous analysis, the frantic scribbles, the carefully drawn costume designs. He'd almost let it all go. But his hands had frozen. To throw it away would be to admit defeat, to agree that the last 10 years of his life, ever since that devastating diagnosis, quirkless, had been a complete and utter waste. He couldn't do it. The book was a part of his soul, and even a broken soul was better than none at all. He reached the bottom of the stairwell, and shuffled out into the bustling street, a ghost in the river of life. People jostled past him, their faces a mix of afternoon lethargy and purpose. They all had places to be, lives to live, and quirks that defined a part of them. They were whole. Izuku felt like a jigsaw puzzle with the centerpiece missing, a gaping void that everyone could see. An explosion rocked the air. It was a distant, percussive boom that vibrated through the soles of his shoes. Heads turned. Phones were raised. A pillar of black smoke began to curl into the sky a few blocks away. The ingrained instinct of a decade, the reflex of a lifelong hero fan, kicked in before his despair could smother it. His feet moved, carrying him toward the chaos, his mind already cataloging possibilities. Villain attack. Property damage is significant based on the sound. Pro-heroes should be on the scene already. He chided himself. What are you doing? You're not an analyst. You're not a hero. You're just Izuku. But his feet didn't stop. He navigated the growing crowd, his smaller frame allowing him to slip through gaps where others were stuck. The smell of burnt sugar and ozone hit him first, a sickly sweet and acrid combination. Then came the heat, a palpable wave that made the air shimmer. He broke through the front line of the crowd and stopped dead. It was him. The sludge villain. The same amorphous, grinning monster that All Might had bottled up not an hour ago. The bottle. Izuku's blood ran cold. It must have fallen from All Might's pocket when Izuku had foolishly grabbed onto his leg. This was his fault. The scene was one of contained pandemonium. The narrow street was flanked by shops, their windows shattered. Flames licked up the side of a building where a gas line had likely ruptured. The heroes were there, but they were ineffective. Death Arms was trying to punch the liquid villain, but his fists just sank into the muck with no effect. Kamui Woods was evacuating civilians, his wood-based quirk useless against a villain who was actively on fire in several places. The rookie hero, Empty Lady, was present, but the alley was far too narrow for her to use her gigantification quirk without bringing the surrounding buildings down. Backdraft was doing his best to contain the blaze, but it was a losing battle. They were all stalled, paralyzed by a terrible matchup. And then Izuku saw it. Deep within the swirling, disgusting mass of green sludge, was a pair of eyes. Wild, terrified, and furious, with irises the color of popping explosions. Blonde, spiky hair was just visible. Kaken. Izuku's breath hitched. Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood friend, his tormentor, was being suffocated, his explosive quirk being turned against him and the city. The villain was using him like a living grenade, setting off sporadic, uncontrolled blasts that kept the heroes at bay. Bakugo was drowning. His eyes, for the first time Izuku could ever remember, were pleading. They were screaming for help. And then Izuku saw him. Standing in the back of the crowd, hidden in the shadows of an awning, was the skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi. He was clutching his side, a thin trickle of blood staining his lips as he coughed. Steam wafted from his body, a sign he was desperately trying to transform, but his time was up. The embers of One for All were fading, and he was as much a spectator as anyone else. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second across the chaotic street. In All Might's gaze, Izuku saw the same horror, the same helplessness he felt in his own chest. The world went silent. The crackle of flames, the shouts of the crowd, the panicked cries of the heroes, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. The only thing that existed was the sight of Bakugo's suffocating face and the knowledge that the heroes couldn't act, and All Might wouldn't act. Notebook number 13, page 25. The thought surfaced unbidden. Sludge villain? Amorphous body susceptible to dispersal via high-pressure wind or concussive force. Weak points. Eyes and the solid teeth are the only truly solid parts of its body. A targeted strike there could cause systemic shock and loss of cohesion. He had the knowledge. He knew what to do. But he had no power. He was quirkless. He was useless. I'm sorry, kid. It's just not possible. Bakugo's eyes began to roll back in his head. The frantic struggle was weakening. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a heroic declaration. It was an instinct, pure and absolute, that bypassed his brain, his fear, and the crushing weight of his despair. His legs were his own again, pistons of desperate motion. He burst through the police barricade, the yellow tape snapping against his chest. Hey! Kid! Stop! It's too dangerous! Death Arms shouted, but Izuku couldn't hear him. The world had narrowed to a single, desperate tunnel. At the end of that tunnel was Kaken. He unslung his backpack as he ran, his mind finally catching up to his feet. What am I doing? I'm going to die. But another, stronger voice, a voice that sounded like his 10-year younger self, screamed back. His eyes were calling for help. He swung the heavy backpack, filled with textbooks and the weight of his broken dreams, and hurled it with all his might. It sailed through the air and struck the villain squarely in the eye. The monster recoiled with a wet squelch, its grip loosening for a barest fraction of a second. It was enough. Bakugo's mouth and nose were momentarily free. He took a huge, ragged gasp of air. Kaken! Izuku screamed, his voice raw. He was there now, at the foot of the monster, clawing uselessly at the sludge that held his friend. His fingers sank in, finding no purchase. It was like trying to dig someone out of a pit of tar. What the hell are you doing here, Deku? Bakugo choked out, fury and terror warring in his voice. I don't know. Izuku sobbed, his own tears mixing with the grime on his face. My legs, they just started moving. He kept clawing, his nails scraping, his mind a frantic blank. He was going to die. They were both going to die. And it would be his fault. A wave of utter futility washed over him, so powerful it almost made him collapse. He had done the only thing he could, and it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. He looked up at the villain's gloating, fluid face as a slimy tendril reared back to swat him away like a fly. This was it. The end. In that moment of absolute surrender, a final, defiant cry ripped itself from the depths of his soul, a summation of his entire being. I have to save him! The world fractured. It wasn't a sound. It was a sensation. A soft, golden light, invisible to every eye but his own, bloomed from the center of his chest. It was warm, like the first sunbeam after a long winter, and it hummed with a power that felt impossibly ancient, as old as the concepts of courage and sacrifice themselves. The light enveloped him, and the chaotic street scene around him, the fire, the sludge, Bakugo's terrified face, began to stretch and warp, like a reflection in disturbed water. He felt a pull, not on his body, but on his very essence. It was a sensation of falling upwards, of being drawn through a keyhole into another reality. The noise of the world was replaced by a profound and resonant silence. Time itself seemed to unspool, a single second stretching into an eternity. When the sensation stopped, he was somewhere else entirely. He stood on a floor of what looked like polished, milky white marble that stretched into infinity. It reflected no images, only a soft, pearlescent glow. Above him, there was no sky, only a boundless expanse of soft, liquid gold, like a sunrise that had no beginning and no end. The air was still and clean, carrying a sense of utter tranquility and immense, dormant power. It was a cathedral built from silence and light. "You are brave." The voice wasn't heard with his ears, but felt in his mind, a chord of serene melody that resonated within his spirit. He spun around. Before him stood a figure, or the impression of one. It was a woman, tall and regal, but her form was not solid. She was woven from the same golden light as the sky, a spectral silhouette of shimmering motes of energy. Her features were indistinct, yet he could feel a sense of a kind, ancient smile and eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of ages. She wore what looked like ethereal armor, its lines clean and noble. Where am I?" Izuku stammered, his voice feeling small and fragile in the immense silence. "Who are you?" "Am I dead?" "You are in the Nexus, the locus of wills," the Golden Woman replied, her voice washing over his panic like a calming tide. "It is the heart of a power that predates quirks, predates even the long histories of your world. And I was its keeper. The first and the last until now." Izuku's mind, already reeling, struggled to grasp her words. "Keeper? Nexus? I don't understand." "The villain. Kaken." "Time flows differently here," she said, raising a hand woven from starlight. "In the world you left, less than a single heartbeat has passed. You have a moment to understand." She drifted closer, and though she was intangible, Izuku felt a profound sense of presence, of history, of duty. For millennia, the mantle of the Keeper has been passed to those who have proven themselves worthy. It is a power not of the body, but of the spirit. It cannot be given, stolen, or inherited by blood. It can only be earned. Earned? But how? Izuku asked, his mind flashing back to his quirkless diagnosis, to All Might's pitying gaze. I'm nobody. I'm quirkless. I have nothing. You have everything that matters, the Keeper corrected gently. Just now you ran into a danger that seasoned heroes feared to tread. Why? Not for glory, for there was none to be had. Not for power, for you believe you have none. Not even in the conscious hope of becoming a hero, for that dream had just been shattered. You ran for one reason and one reason alone. She paused, letting the truth of it settle over him. You ran because someone needed saving. Izuku stared at her, the simple, profound truth of her words striking him to his core. He hadn't thought. He had just acted. That is the key. The Keeper continued, her form glowing a little brighter. A purely selfless act of heroism. A will to protect, untainted by ego or ambition. It is the purest expression of the heroic spirit, and it is the resonance that has called to the Nexus. Your cry, I have to save him, was not a plea. It was a vow, and it has proven you worthy of becoming the new Keeper. Izuku felt his knees weaken. Me? A Keeper? But, a Keeper of what? Of the Aegis, she answered. The sacred weapons. 7 artifacts of pure will, tied to the 7 core virtues of a true hero. They are not physical tools you carry, but spiritual constructs you manifest. They are an extension of your soul, and you must earn each one by truly understanding the virtue it represents. She raised a single, glowing finger. Your first trial is already upon you. Your first vow has already been made. You wish to save the boy. But you have no strength to fight, no power to destroy. So, answer me, Izuku Midoriya. In this moment, what is your most desperate, all-consuming need? Izuku didn't have to think. The answer was the frantic pulse beating in his throat. It was the image of Bakugo's face, blue and desperate. It was the terrifying arc of the villain's descending tendril. To protect him, Izuku whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I need to shield him. I need to stand between him and harm. I need to be a wall he can shelter behind. As he spoke, he felt a new energy surge within him, drawn from the golden sky of the Nexus. It wasn't a violent power, but a steady, resilient one. It felt like the deep roots of an old oak, like a mountain against the wind. He focused on that feeling, on the raw, desperate desire to protect. Yes, the Keeper's voice urged him on. Embrace that vow. Give it form. Let your will be its smith, and your spirit its forge. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, pouring every ounce of his being into that singular concept: shield. Protect. Defend. Unbroken. The golden light from his chest intensified, flowing down his left arm. It felt warm, then hot, then solid. He felt a phantom weight settle over his forearm, a feeling of absolute, indomitable defense. A name bloomed in his mind, ancient and resonant, a word he had never heard but understood with perfect clarity. Aegis. He opened his eyes. Strapped to his left forearm was a shield. It was a kite shield, perfectly fitted to him, but it was unlike any he had ever seen. It was forged not of metal, but of solid, translucent golden light, the same color as the Nexus sky. Intricate, shifting patterns like circuitry or constellations swirled just beneath its surface, and it hummed with a low, steady thrum of power. It felt impossibly sturdy, a piece of eternity chained to his arm. The Aegis of the unbroken vow, the Keeper said, her voice filled with approval. It is powered by your will to protect others. The more selfless your desire to shield them, the stronger it will be. It will absorb and redirect any kinetic force thrown against it. It is your first weapon. Your first truth. She began to fade, her form dissolving back into the ambient light of the Nexus. Go now, Keeper. Your moment is here. The rest you must learn on your own. Her final words echoed in the silence. Do not fail the vow. The world snapped back into place with the force of a physical blow. The noise, the heat, the stench of burning sludge crashed down on him. Less than a second had passed. The villain's slimy tendril was still descending, a green sledgehammer aimed directly at his head. Bakugo's eyes were wide with fresh terror, not for himself, but for the quirkless idiot who had run in to save him. Izuku didn't have time to process the metaphysical whiplash. Instinct, now married to a new, impossible power, took over. The shield on his arm was real. It was heavy. It was there. With a desperate cry, he didn't raise it to block. He acted on a different instinct. He shoved his shielded arm deep into the liquid body of the villain, aiming for the space right in front of Bakugo's face. The effect was instantaneous. The Aegis, humming with golden energy, did not just part the sludge, it repelled it. A perfect, hemispherical pocket of clean air formed around the shield, pushing the suffocating goo away from Bakugo's mouth and nose. It was like shoving a force field into a pool of water. Bakugo collapsed forward against the inside of the shield's barrier, coughing and hacking, greedily sucking in the precious oxygen. Deku! The villain shrieked, a sound of fury and confusion. Its main body seemed to realize the foreign object embedded within it. The descending tendril changed its trajectory, no longer a swat but a piercing strike, aimed at the center of the glowing shield. There was no time to think about a stance, no time for heroic poses. Izuku just braced himself, planting his red shoes on the cracked asphalt, and met the attack head-on. The impact was not the sharp, metallic clang he expected. There was a deep, resonant chime, like a colossal temple bell being struck. The moment the sludge tendril hit the Aegis, a wave of golden light rippled across its surface from the point of impact. Izuku felt the force of the blow, but it wasn't a jarring shock. It was a pressure, an immense weight that he could feel the shield drinking. The kinetic energy of the attack was being absorbed, swirling into the intricate patterns beneath the shield's surface. For a heartbeat, the Aegis glowed brighter, supercharged with the villain's own power. Then, with another resonant chime, it released the energy, not back at the villain, but straight down into the ground. The asphalt around Izuku's feet exploded downwards, creating a crater a meter wide as the redirected force was harmlessly discharged into the earth. The villain recoiled stunned. The crowd gasped. The pro-heroes stared, their jaws slack, and in the back of the crowd, Toshinori Yagi's sunken eyes went wide. He had seen it. A quirkless boy, who he had told was worthless, had just manifested an ability of impossible power, and used it with perfect, protective instinct. He had created an opening. That sight, that impossible act of pure heroism, ignited the fading embers of One for All into a roaring inferno. I really am pathetic. All Might's voice boomed, no longer weak but full of its signature power. His body swelled, muscles bursting forth as steam billowed off him, the symbol of peace reborn through sheer force of will. Even after I lectured you, I was not putting what I said into practice. He blurred past the police line, a yellow and blue streak of hope. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. He reached the villain in an instant, his fist cocked back. He grabbed Izuku, shielding the boy's body with his own massive frame. You saved him, my boy. You created the chance we needed. Then he turned his attention to the villain, his smile a terrifying force of nature. Detroit. Smash! A hurricane of pure power erupted from his fist. The wind pressure was so immense it was like a physical wall, atomizing the sludge villain. The sky, which had been clear, clouded over in an instant, and then it began to rain. Not water from the sky, but the dispersed, filthy remnants of the defeated villain. The silence that followed was broken by the collective exhale of 100 onlookers. The fires were extinguished. The danger was over. All Might, the symbol of peace, stood victorious, his fist raised to the sky. But for many, the most unbelievable sight wasn't the man who could change the weather with a punch. It was the small, green-haired boy standing amidst the wreckage, looking down at his own arm as if it belonged to a stranger. The adrenaline began to fade, and with it, the immediate, desperate need to protect. The golden shield on Izuku's arm flickered. The intricate pattern slowed, the light dimmed, and then, like a mirage dissolving in the heat, the aegis of the unbroken vow faded into nothingness, leaving his arm bare and trembling. He was left with nothing but the phantom weight, a memory of impossible power. The aftermath was a blur. Reporters swarmed All Might. Paramedics checked on Bakugo, who was conscious and explosive with rage and confusion, his eyes constantly darting toward Izuku. The other pro-heroes approached Izuku, their expressions a mix of bewilderment and grudging respect. That was incredibly reckless, kid! You could have been killed! Death Arm scolded, but there was no heat in it. But your quick thinking and that shield, you saved that boy's life. Kamui Woods added, bowing his head slightly. We were stalled. You broke the stalemate. What is your quirk? Some kind of light-based barrier projection? Izuku stammered, his mind a scrambled mess. He looked at his empty arm. It wasn't a quirk. The keeper had been clear. But what could he say? An ancient spectral entity in a pan-dimensional reality just made me the guardian of 7 holy virtues? They'd send him to a psychiatrist, not a hero school. I don't know. Before they could press him, All Might appeared, gently steering Izuku away from the pro-heroes and the encroaching reporters. He led him to a quiet side street, away from the prying eyes. The hero's smile was gone, replaced by an expression of profound curiosity, and something that looked suspiciously like awe. My boy, All Might began, his voice back to its normal, booming timbre. I owe you an apology. I told you that you couldn't be a hero, yet you proved me wrong more profoundly than anyone I have ever met. When I saw you, a scared, quirkless boy, run into danger while I stood by and did nothing, you reminded me what it truly means to be a hero. Izuku's eyes welled up. This was the praise he had dreamed of his entire life, and it felt 1,000 times more meaningful than he had ever imagined. All Might then leaned in closer, his voice dropping. But I must ask. That shield. It was no simple support item. It appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. It withstood a blow that would have staggered even me. What was it? A latent quirk you never knew you had? Izuku looked into the eyes of his idol, the #1 hero, and for the first time, he had a secret that even All Might couldn't possibly comprehend. The weight of it was immense, a mountain range settling on his shoulders. The memory of the Nexus, of the Golden Woman, of the aegis materializing on his arm, was so vivid and yet so utterly insane. He shook his head, the only honest answer he could give. All Might. I really don't know. All Might studied him for a long moment, seeing the genuine confusion and shock in the boy's eyes. He saw no deception, only a child who had just been touched by something far beyond his understanding. He clapped a hand on Izuku's shoulder, a gesture so full of pride and promise that it sent a jolt through Izuku's entire body. Whatever it is, All Might said, a new, determined fire in his eyes. It is the power of a true hero. And I was wrong about you. You can become a hero. Later, as Izuku walked the final block to his apartment, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The world was no longer gray. It was saturated with terrifying, brilliant, and overwhelming color. His body ached. His mind was a maelstrom of questions. But the hollow space inside him was gone. In its place was a warmth, a low, steady hum that seemed to emanate from his very soul. He lifted his left arm, tracing the space where the aegis had been. He could still feel it, a phantom weight, a silent promise. The path forward was no longer a dead end. It was an unknown road, shrouded in mist and ancient secrets. He didn't have one for all. He had something else. Something older. Something that was undeniably his. A name echoed in the quiet corners of his mind, a title that felt both impossibly heavy and absolutely right. Keeper. And for the first time in 10 years, Izuku Midoriya walked with his head held high, not toward a dream that was out of reach, but toward a destiny that had just chosen him. The first morning of the rest of his life began with doubt. Izuku awoke with a gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs as if trying to escape. The filtered morning light of his All Might-themed bedroom was a stark contrast to the boundless, liquid gold of the Nexus. The memory was so vivid, so all-encompassing, that its absence felt like a physical loss. He sat bolt upright, his worn smash pajama shirt sticking to his skin with a cold sweat. Was it real, or was it just a hallucination? A final, desperate fantasy concocted by a traumatized, quirkless mind in a moment of near-death terror. The human brain was a funny thing, wasn't it? Capable of creating entire worlds to shield itself from a reality too harsh to bear. The shield, the golden woman, the resonant chime of impact. It felt more real than the pillow beneath his head, but it defied every law of nature he had ever known. His left arm tingled with a phantom weight. He stared at it, a skinny, scarred limb, utterly unremarkable. There was no glowing sigil, no hidden device. Nothing. It wasn't real, he whispered, the words tasting like ash. The hope that had bloomed in his chest the previous evening shriveled, replaced by the familiar, cold dread of disappointment. Of course it wasn't real. He was Deku. Useless, quirkless Deku. He had simply had a psychotic break while his childhood friend was being murdered. A soft knock came at his door. Izuku? Are you awake, sweetie? Breakfast is ready, his mother's voice. A wave of protective affection, so fierce it was almost painful, washed over him. His mother, who had cried for him and with him, who had always supported him, even when his dreams seemed impossible. Who would be devastated if anything ever happened to him. Who he would move heaven and earth to protect. Protect. The word echoed in his mind, not as a desperate plea this time, but as a quiet, fervent prayer. And with it came the hum. It started in his chest, a low thrum of energy that he felt in his bones. It was the same feeling from the Nexus. Hope, wild and untamable, surged back to life. He focused on the feeling, on the image of his mother's kind face. He poured all the love and protectiveness he felt for her into that single concept. Shield her. Keep her safe. Unbroken. He held up his left arm, his breath caught in his throat. Faint motes of golden light began to coalesce around his forearm. They swirled like dust in a sunbeam, slowly, tentatively forming a shape. A translucent, flickering outline of a shield appeared, barely visible in the morning light. It was small, rounder than the kite shield from yesterday, and it looked as fragile as spun glass. He could feel its connection to his will. It was weak because the threat was imagined, the vow a gentle one. But it was there. Tears streamed down Izuku's face, silent and hot. It was real. It was all real. The shield vanished as his concentration broke. He wiped his eyes, a grin spreading across his face, so wide it made his cheeks ache. It was a true, unburdened smile, the first one he'd had in years. He had a power. Not a quirk, but something more. Something he had earned. And now, he had to become worthy of it. The meeting point was Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, a place that had long ago ceased to be a beach and had become a monument to illegal dumping. Mountains of rusted appliances, forgotten furniture, and generations of trash formed a jagged, artificial coastline. The sea breeze carried not the scent of salt, but of decay and rust. This was where All Might had told him to meet him. Izuku saw him from a distance, the skeletal figure of Toshinori Yagi standing on a precarious pile of discarded washing machines, looking out at the polluted water. He looked small and frail against the backdrop of overwhelming filth. "You came, my boy," Toshinori said as Izuku clambered up beside him. His voice was quiet, raspy, but held a warmth that cut through the morning chill. "Of course, All Might. You told me to," Izuku said, bowing frantically. Toshinori offered a small, sad smile. "I suppose I did. Look at this place. For years, ocean currents have been depositing trash here, and people have added to it with their own illegal dumping. The heroes of today, they're all focused on the flashy stuff. The big villains. This kind of slow, creeping decay gets ignored." He sighed, a faint puff of steam escaping his lips. "It's a different kind of villainy." He turned to face Izuku, his sunken blue eyes holding an intense, analytical gaze. "Yesterday, you ran into a fire you couldn't quench to save someone you couldn't reach. Your body was weak, untrained, and unprepared. That mysterious power of yours, that shield, it was magnificent. But you were its anchor, and an anchor needs to be strong, or it will be dragged under by the storm." Izuku nodded, understanding dawning. 10 months, Toshinori said, gesturing to the entire disaster zone of a beach. "The UA entrance exam is in 10 months. Your goal is to restore this entire coastline, to move all of this back to where it belongs." Izuku's jaw dropped. He looked at the literal mountains of junk. There were refrigerators, cars, countless tons of scrap metal. It was an impossible task. "All of this? But why?" "For 3 reasons," Toshinori explained, holding up a finger. 1. This is an act of quiet, unglamorous heroism. It is community service on a heroic scale. It will teach you the value of the work no one sees. He held up a second finger. 2. It will be the most grueling physical training imaginable. To earn a spot at UA, even with your power, you need a vessel of iron. Your mind and will are clearly strong, your body must match them. You will haul, lift, and carry until you break, and then you will get up and do it again. You will forge yourself into a hero, piece by piece. Izuku stared at him, his heart pounding. Then, Toshinori's expression softened. "And 3, he said, his voice dropping to an almost whisper. "I am not offering you a quirk, young Midoriya. I cannot. My power is a sacred torch, and it is already promised to another, but what you have, it is something else. Something I don't understand. But I see the heart that wields it, and that is a heart I am willing to invest in. I will mentor you. I will devise your training plan, your diet, and I will teach you the principles of heroism. This task is not a price to be paid for my power. It is your own path to forging the hero you were meant to be. I will simply be your guide." The distinction was critical. Izuku wasn't being asked to become the next All Might. He was being challenged to become the first Izuku Midoriya. The cleaning of the beach wasn't a transaction. It was a crucible. A fire ignited in Izuku's belly, hotter and more determined than ever before. This wasn't All Might's dream for him. This was his own. "Okay," Izuku said, his voice firm, resolute. "I'll do it. I'll make this entire beach shine again." Toshinori's skeletal face broke into a wide, proud grin. "That's the spirit, my boy. Now, let's try moving this refrigerator." The next 10 months were a blur of structured agony. The training plan All Might, or rather Yagi-san, as he insisted Izuku call him in his weak form, devised was brutal. Izuku's days became a repeating cycle. Wake before dawn, run 5 kilometers, school, then straight to Dagoba Beach until long after the sun had set. He'd haul rusting metal, drag waterlogged tires, and learn the science of leverage to move objects that should have been immovable for a boy his size. The first 3 months were pure hell. His muscles screamed in protest. His hands were a canvas of blisters, cuts, and calluses. Every night he would collapse into bed, a symphony of aches, his body feeling more broken than forged. During this time, he practiced with the Aegis in secret, usually in the dead of night on the now-clearing sections of the beach. He quickly learned its rules, as if they were written on his soul. He tried punching a pile of scrap with the shield manifested. The golden energy simply absorbed the force of his own blow, resulting in a dull thump and a tingling in his knuckles. It had no offensive capability. He tried summoning it to protect himself as he intentionally dislodged a precariously balanced washing machine. It appeared, solid and true, and deflected the falling object with a soft chime. But it felt thinner, less substantial. The golden light was paler. Then, one evening, as he was leaving the beach, he saw a speeding car come screeching around a corner, its driver distracted by their phone. Directly in its path was a small, terrified calico cat, frozen in the headlights. There was no thought. Only the familiar primal surge. Protect the helpless. He lunged, not trying to get in front of the car, but throwing himself toward the cat. He manifested the Aegis, his will focused entirely on shielding the tiny, trembling creature. The shield that appeared was not the pale, utilitarian version he summoned for himself. This one was brilliant, blazing with the light of a small sun. It wasn't just on his arm. It extended, forming a solid, golden dome over him and the cat just as the car's bumper would have made contact. The car didn't hit the shield. The driver, startled by the sudden, blinding flash of golden light, slammed on the brakes, swerving and screeching to a halt inches away. The Aegis had acted as a perfect, non-violent deterrent. As the driver sped away with a curse, Izuku felt the shield's power. It was humming with an energy so potent, so absolute, it felt like he was holding a piece of a star. He knelt there, panting, as the cat rubbed against his leg, purring. The Aegis faded, leaving him in the twilight. He finally understood. The shield wasn't powered by his physical strength, but by the purity of his intent. Protecting himself was a logical act. Protecting others was a spiritual one. From months 4 to 7, he found his rhythm. His body, once scrawny, began to change. Lean, wiry muscle defined his arms and back. The endless hauling had given him a core of steel. The work was still agonizingly hard, but it was a productive agony now. He could see the progress, not just in his reflection, but in the growing swathes of clean sand. Yagi-san would often sit on a cleared pile of debris, giving him pointers, telling him old war stories of heroes past, instilling in him the ethics and philosophy of their shared calling. By the final 3 months, the transformation was undeniable. Izuku was no longer the frail, hunched-over boy who had met All Might. He stood straighter, his eyes clear and focused. The beach was nearly pristine. On the final day, the last piece of junk, a rusted, hollowed-out van, was towed away by a proper disposal company that Yagi-san had arranged. Izuku stood on the clean, reclaimed sand, watching the sunrise paint the horizon. The sea breeze smelled of salt and possibility. Yagi-san stood beside him, back in his towering All Might form for a brief, celebratory moment. He had his phone out, showing Izuku the picture he'd taken 10 months ago, a crying, scrawny boy perched atop a mountain of garbage. "Look at you now, young Midoriya!" All Might boomed, his voice thick with pride. He wasn't looking at the beach. He was looking at Izuku. "You did it! You took an impossible task and, through sheer grit and determination, you made it possible. Your body is ready. Your spirit was always ready. Now go and show them all what a hero looks like." Izuku looked at his hands, calloused and strong. He felt the quiet, steady hum of the Keeper's power within him. He was ready. The UA auditorium was massive, buzzing with the nervous energy of hundreds of hopeful teenagers. Izuku sat amongst them, feeling a familiar twinge of inadequacy. Everyone around him was chattering about their powerful quirks, explosion hands, hardening skin, engine legs. And him? He had a secret shield that he couldn't even explain. He was still, on paper, quirkless. Present Mix's presentation was loud and flashy, ending with the reveal of the enemies, 1, 2, and 3-point robots. The goal was to immobilize as many as possible within the time limit. Izuku's analytical mind immediately saw the problem. They're all combat-based. I have no way to destroy them. My only weapon is a shield. A knot of panic tightened in his stomach. How was he supposed to pass an exam based on destruction when his power was purely defensive? Then, he remembered Yagi-san's words. A hero's first duty is to protect. And Present Mix's final comment about a fourth robot, the zero-pointer, a gimmick to be avoided. And a subtle hint, heroism isn't just about fighting villains, listeners, rescue points. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. That had to be it. There had to be another way to score. He couldn't win their game, so he would have to play his own. The massive gates to the Mach City battleground slid open. And start! While everyone else shot forward in a blur of quirks and activation cries, Izuku hesitated for a single second, his eyes scanning the sprawling cityscape. Then he ran, not towards the nearest robot, but towards the densest cluster of examinees. The chaos was immediate. A boy with purple balls on his head was throwing sticky spheres that immobilized a one-pointer but also created a treacherous trap on the ground. A girl with pink skin was spraying acid, melting a two-pointer but also sending corrosive splatter everywhere. Izuku saw a flash of metal flying through the air, a piece of shrapnel from an explosion caused by a blonde kid with a naval laser. It was heading straight for a girl with earphone jacks extending from her lobes, who was focused on channeling a vibration into the ground. "Look out!" Izuku yelled. He didn't wait for a response. He dashed forward, his will flaring. The Aegis materialized on his arm, a brilliant golden kite shield, and he intercepted the shrapnel with a crisp chime. The girl, Jiro, looked up, startled, then gave him a quick, appreciative nod before turning back to her task. Izuku didn't linger. He was already scanning for the next crisis. He spent the next several minutes in a whirlwind of defensive action. He wasn't a combatant. He was a sheepdog. He saw a one-pointer bearing down on an examinee who was trying to pull another from some rubble. Izuku got between them, planting his feet and taking the robot's charge on his shield. The Aegis absorbed the impact, discharging it into the ground with a spiderweb of cracks, buying the other 2 precious seconds to get clear. He earned 0 points, but he saved 2 people from being eliminated or injured. He found the naval laser boy Oyama, pinned under the leg of a disabled two-pointer, his flamboyant costume snagged. "Non, merci! My sparkle is trapped!" he cried. Izuku jammed the edge of the Aegis under the robot's leg. It wasn't a weapon, but it was an indestructible object. Using it as a lever, he strained, his newly forged muscles screaming, and pried the heavy limb up just enough for Oyama to scramble free. "Merci! You are a most serviceable, if unglamorous, knight," Aoyama declared, before running off in search of more targets. Again and again, Izuku threw himself into the path of danger, not for himself, but for others. He used the Aegis to block stray projectiles, to redirect rampaging robots, to shield those who had overextended. He was a golden blur of pure defense, a guardian angel in a tracksuit. His score remained a perfect, dismal 0, and then the ground began to shake. A shadow fell over the entire city block. From behind a skyscraper, the zero-pointer rose to its full, terrifying height. It was a Goliath of green metal, bigger than most buildings, a walking catastrophe. "It's the zero-pointer!" someone shrieked. The stampede began immediately. Everyone, even the most confident examinees, turned and ran. It was an obstacle, not an opponent. Izuku ran with them, his lungs burning. A cry of pain cut through the panic. "Ow!" Izuku skidded to a halt and looked back. A girl with a brown bob cut and rosy cheeks was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a large slab of concrete dislodged by the robot's emergence. It was the friendly girl he'd spoken to briefly before the exam, the one who had stopped him from tripping. Uraraka. She was trying to use her quirk, making the slab glow with pink energy, but she was pale and clearly struggling. The zero-pointer took a thunderous step forward, its single, massive red eye locking onto her. It raised a fist the size of a bus. Time slowed. Everyone was running away. The heroes in training were saving themselves. But she was trapped. Her eyes were wide with terror. A hero's first duty is to protect. Izuku's choice was not a choice. He spun on his heel and ran back, directly into the shadow of the mechanical god. The hum in his chest roared to life, a supernova of protective will. This was it. This was the moment his training, his spirit, and his power had been leading to. Save her. Shield her. Be unbreakable. He reached her side as the colossal fist began to descend. There was no time to move the rubble. It's okay, he yelled, his voice strained but steady. I've got you. He planted his feet over her, his body a frail barrier against the apocalypse. He thrust his arm towards the sky. The Aegis erupted into existence, no longer just a shield on his arm, but a massive, golden dome of pure, solid light, enveloping them both. It glowed with the intensity of 1,000 suns, the patterns within swirling like frantic galaxies. The fist connected. The world was a single, deafening chime that resonated not in the air, but in Izuku's very soul. The force was unimaginable, a physical weight of judgment from a metal god. He felt it pressing down, a pressure that should have crushed him into dust. His legs trembled, the muscles in his back and shoulders screaming as he fought to anchor the shield, to anchor his will against the overwhelming force. The Aegis held. It drank the cataclysmic kinetic energy, glowing brighter and brighter until it was impossible to look at. The golden light turned white-hot. For a terrifying second, Izuku felt his will begin to fray, the shield threatening to shatter. He squeezed his eyes shut, picturing Uraraka's terrified face, his mother's smile, All Might's proud grin. He poured every ounce of his being, every drop of his spirit, into the shield. Unbroken! With a final, explosive boom, the Aegis discharged the energy. But not up. Not out. It channeled the entire, colossal force of the zero-pointer's punch straight down. The concrete street beneath the shield didn't just crack, it vaporized. The earth heaved. A massive crater erupted outwards from the dome of light, shattering the ground for 50 meters in every direction, the shockwave kicking up a huge cloud of dust and debris. The zero-pointer itself, its arms suddenly meeting no resistance, stumbled, its own momentum throwing it off balance. Inside the dome, Izuku and Uraraka were untouched. The light faded. The Aegis vanished. The sudden release of tension and spiritual exertion was too much. Izuku's vision swam with black spots. He collapsed forward, his consciousness winking out just as Present Mix's voice screamed over the loudspeakers. Time's up! In a darkened room deep within UA's central tower, a dozen monitors displayed the chaos of the exams. The mood was one of professional assessment. That Bakugo kid has incredible offensive power. A clear top scorer, a hero commented. The one with the engines is impressive too. Mobility and power, said another, but two figures were focused on a single screen. Nizu, the principal, a small, white-furred creature of indeterminate species, sipped his tea. Beside him, Shota Aizawa, the hero known as Eraserhead, stared at his monitor with narrowed, tired eyes, his usual apathy replaced by a focused scowl. Anything on your end, Aizawa? Nizu asked, not looking away from the screen. 0 villain points, Aizawa grunted. He hasn't engaged a single robot directly. According to his file, he's Midoriya Izuku. Registered as quirkless. That got the attention of the other teachers in the room. Quirkless? Then he should have been screened out. How did he even get this far? Watch, Aizawa commanded, pointing a finger wrapped in his capture weapon. On the screen, they saw Izuku materialize his shield to block the shrapnel from hitting Jiro. A projection quirk, Midnight suggested. A late bloomer, perhaps. The registry is often slow to update. Maybe, Aizawa said, his eyes hard. But look at how he's using it. He's not fighting. He's managing. Directing traffic. Creating openings for others. He's playing a different game. They watched in silence as Izuku performed his series of rescues, never scoring, yet always present at critical moments. Then, the zero-pointer appeared. They watched as the students fled. All except one. What is that idiot doing? A teacher muttered as Izuku ran back. When the golden dome erupted into being, the room fell silent. They watched, mesmerized, as the colossal fist descended, Aizawa's eyes widened slightly, and he reflexively activated his quirk, his hair floating, his gaze locked on the image of Izuku on the screen. It was a futile gesture, trying to erase a power through a video feed, but it was instinct. The impact, the chime that even the audio pickups registered, the glorious, terrifying explosion of redirected energy. It left the room of pro-heroes speechless. Aizawa blinked, his quirk deactivating. It didn't work, he said, his voice flat. Niza finally turned to him. Your erasure? I felt for his quirk factor through the feed. It's a fine-tuned skill, but I can usually feel something. With him, there was nothing. It was like trying to erase the wind. Whatever that power is, it doesn't operate on the biological principles of a quirk. The file is correct. He is quirkless. Aizawa leaned forward, his expression a mixture of profound confusion and grudging admiration. This is an unquirkable power. Niza's smile, usually cheerful, took on a razor-sharp, intrigued edge. Oh my! How utterly, brilliantly fascinating! He tapped a few keys on his console, bringing up the scoring. As it stands, Midoriya Izuku has 0 villain points. A clear failure. He deserves a spot, Aizawa said immediately, surprising everyone, including himself. Any kid who runs toward a 0-pointer to save a stranger, while the others run away, has more heroic potential in him than half the students on that field. I agree, Niza chirped, his whiskers twitching with delight. But we have a system. Luckily, the system has contingencies. He pulled up a separate tally, invisible to the students. Rescue points, awarded for acts of selfless heroism. Let's see, preventing injury to examinee 7111, 10 points. Aiding examinee 3245, 5 points. Preventing a collision between a robot and examinee 2234, 15 points. And for the final act, saving examinee 2144 from certain elimination and possible critical injury, at extreme personal risk, while also neutralizing the primary area obstacle. Niza paused, tapping a claw on his chin. Let's call it 60 points. A new record. He turned to the silent, weak form of Toshinori Yagi, who was trying to blend into the shadows. A magnificent performance, wouldn't you agree, All Might? Toshinori, who had been watching the entire spectacle with a swelling heart, simply gave a thin, proud smile and a slow, deliberate nod. A week later, a thick envelope from Uehai arrived. Izuku held it in his trembling hands, his mother hovering nervously behind him. This was it. The moment of truth. He had no villain points. Logically, he had failed. But the memory of the Aegis holding firm against the 0-pointer gave him a sliver of hope. He tore it open. A small metal disc clattered onto his desk. It flickered to life, projecting a hologram. I am here! As a projection! All Might's voice boomed. Izuku yelped, falling out of his chair. His mother gasped. The holographic All Might cleared his throat. First, I must commend you on your performance in the written exam. Excellent scores! But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about your practical exam. The hologram showed footage of Izuku's frantic rescues, culminating in the final, breathtaking stand against the 0-pointer. You scored a perfect 0 in villain points. Ordinarily, that would be a failing grade. All Might's face was serious. Izuku's heart sank. But, the hero boomed, striking a pose. That was not the only way to pass. This is a hero course, after all. How could we deny a student who acted on the fundamental tenets of heroism, self-sacrifice, and the protection of others? For these actions, we award rescue points. A leaderboard appeared next to All Might. Izuku scanned it frantically. His name was there. Midoriya Izuku. Villain points 0. Rescue points 60. It placed him firmly in the top 10. Young Midoriya, All Might said, his holographic eyes seeming to look right at Izuku. You entered an exam designed to reward destruction, and you saved people instead. Your power, it may be a mystery, but your heart is not. And a heroic heart is the rarest and most powerful gift of all. He pointed a finger directly at the camera, at Izuku. Welcome, Izuku Midoriya. This is your Hero Academia. The hologram fizzled out. The room was silent, save for the sound of Inko Midoriya's happy sobbing. Izuku stared at the empty space where the projection had been, tears of his own finally breaking free and tracing paths down his cheeks. He had done it. He had passed. He was going to UA. He looked at his arm, then clenched it into a fist. This was just the beginning. He was stepping onto a world stage with a power no one understood, himself included. He had 10 months of training behind him and a lifetime of challenges ahead. He wasn't the next symbol of peace. He was something new, something unknown. He was the keeper, and his journey was just getting started. The scale of UA High was, in a word, intimidating. The gateway was colossal, a testament to the larger-than-life aspirations housed within. The hallways were wide enough to accommodate students with gigantification quirks, and the windows seemed to stretch from floor to ceiling, flooding the corridors with the optimistic light of a new day. For Izuku Midoriya, stepping through those gates felt like crossing the threshold into a legend. Every corner he turned, every student he passed with some minor, casual display of their quirk, was a reminder that he was finally here. He belonged, or at least he'd been allowed in. The feeling of belonging was still a work in progress. He found Class 1A, the door itself an imposing slab of steel that looked more suited for a bank vault. Taking a deep breath, he slid it open. The classroom was already buzzing with a low hum of chatter, a collection of the most promising young heroes in the country. He saw the stern, bespectacled boy from the entrance exam chopping the air with his hands while lecturing a familiar, spiky-haired figure about the disrespect of putting one's feet on the desk. "Don't you think that is disrespectful to the UA upperclassmen and the craftspeople who made these desks?" the boy demanded, his arms moving like rigid pistons. Katsuki Bakugo just sneered, leaning back in his chair with a look of supreme, explosive arrogance. "Like I give a crap. What middle school you from, you stuck-up extra?" Izuku flinched. He'd hoped, foolishly, that maybe getting into UA would have mellowed Kaken out. It seemed to have had the opposite effect, concentrating his rage into a denser, more potent form. "Oh, hi! Deku!" The cheerful voice cut through his anxiety. He turned to see Achiko Uraraka, the girl he'd saved from the zero-pointer, her brown bob bouncing as she beamed at him. "Fancy seeing you here! I'm so glad you got in. That last stunt was insane. That shield thing, and then the whole crater. Wow, you Uraraka-san!" "Hi!" Izuku stammered, a hot blush creeping up his neck. This was new territory. A girl was talking to him. Willingly. "I'm glad you're okay. Your quirk is amazing. I was so impressed when you..." He began to trail off into a mumbling analysis of zero gravity before catching himself. "Thanks," she said, her cheeks turning a little pink. "I was going to go thank you after the exam, but you'd already disappeared. I went to present Mike and asked if I could give you some of my points, since you saved me and all, but he said you didn't need them." Izuku's heart swelled. She tried to give him her points. The simple, selfless gesture was so overwhelmingly kind it almost brought tears to his eyes. Their conversation was interrupted by the boy with the glasses, who had abandoned his crusade against Bakugo to march over to them. "Good morning," he announced, his hand held out stiffly. "I am Tenya Ida, from Semi-Private Academy." I'm Izuku Midoriya." "It's nice to meet you, Ida-san," Izuku said, shaking his hand. Ida's gaze was intense. "Midoriya-kun, I must apologize. During the entrance exam, I gravely misjudged you. I saw you as a distraction, but you had grasped the true nature of the test while I had not. I was blinded. As a student, you are clearly my superior, and no, not at all. I just got lucky." Izuku waved his hands frantically. Their awkward introductions were cut short by a new voice, one that was dry, tired, and utterly devoid of enthusiasm. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack up and leave." Everyone turned. Lying on the floor behind the teacher's podium, zipped up to his chin in a yellow sleeping bag, was a man with tired, bloodshot eyes and a curtain of greasy black hair. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He took a long slurp from a juice pouch before unzipping his cocoon and rising to his feet. He was tall, thin, and draped in a black, utilitarian jumpsuit with a strange, scarf-like capture weapon wrapped around his neck. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," he said, his voice a monotone drone. "That's not going to work." Time is a precious resource. You're not being rational. The class stared in stunned silence. This was their teacher? I'm Shota Aizawa. Your homeroom teacher, he announced, his gaze sweeping across them, cold and analytical. He didn't wait for greetings. He reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a blue gym uniform. Put these on. Immediately. Then meet me on the P grounds. The sun was bright on the training field, but Aizawa's presence cast a long, gloomy shadow. A quirk apprehension test? Uraraka asked, voicing the confusion of the entire class. But what about orientation? The opening ceremony? We don't have time for pointless ceremonies, Aizawa stated flatly. The hero course at UA is not a traditional school. You're here to become heroes, and that means pushing your limits from day one. He turned his gaze to Bakugo. You. Bakugo. You got the top score in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in middle school? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk. Aizawa tossed him a softball. Bakugo stepped into the circle, a vicious grin spreading across his face. He wound up, his palm crackling with energy. Die, he screamed, unleashing a focused explosion that propelled the ball like a cannon shot. It soared through the air, a tiny white speck against the blue sky. Aizawa held up a device. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in gasps and excited murmurs. We get to use our quirks for real! This is gonna be awesome! Aizawa's expression soured. Awesome, you say? You think this is a game? His voice dropped, losing its tired drone and gaining a sharp, dangerous edge. You have 3 years here to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Fine. Let's make this interesting. The student who ranks last in total points across these 8 tests will be judged to have 0 potential. He smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. And will be expelled. Immediately, the air turned to ice. Expulsion. On the first day, Izuku's blood ran cold. He had passed the entrance exam by a hair, with a power he barely understood and couldn't control on command. In tests of pure physical ability, even with his 10 months of training, how could he possibly compete with a class full of powerhouse quirks? His dream, so newly realized, was already on the verge of being snatched away. This was, as Aizawa would say, a rational deception. A lie to push them to their limits. But Izuku didn't know that. To him, the threat was as real and as solid as the ground beneath his feet. The tests were a brutal confirmation of his fears. The 50-meter dash, Ida, with the roar of his leg engines, crossed the line in 3.04 seconds. Azuritsuyu, with her frog-like quirk, was not far behind. Izuku ran with all his might, his muscles burning from his beach training. He clocked in at 7.02 seconds. A respectable time for a normal teenager. A pathetic time for a UA hero in training. He saw the pitying glances. The grip strength test, Mizo Shoji, with his multiple dupli arms, shattered the machine's limits. Izuku squeezed with all his might, his calloused hands a testament to his hard work. 56 kilograms. Strong, but again, completely mundane. The standing long jump, the seated toe touch, the side-to-side steps. It was the same story every time. His scores were in the bottom percentile. He was physically fit, more so than he'd ever been, but he was a well-trained quirkless boy in a sea of superhumans. The hum of the keeper's power in his chest was a quiet, steady companion, but it offered no help. The Aegis was for protection. It couldn't make him run faster or jump farther. Panic began to set in, a cold, cloying fog in his mind. He was going to be last. He was going to be expelled. All that work, all that pain, his mother's pride, All Might's faith in him, it was all going to turn to dust. Finally came the ball throw. It was his last chance. He watched Uraraka touch the ball, making it weightless, and throw it into the sky. Aizawa's device read infinity. Izuku's heart sank even further. How could he compete with infinity? He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy and damning in his hand. He had no quirk to use. He couldn't manifest the Aegis and, what? Bunt the ball with it. It was useless. All he had was the raw strength he had built with his own 2 hands. He took a deep breath, channeling the memory of hauling refrigerators, of pulling trucks, of All Might's encouraging shouts. He poured every ounce of his training into the throw. He spun, his body a coiled spring, and unleashed the ball with a desperate cry. It flew through the air, a decent, solid throw, 46 meters. A wave of despair washed over him. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. Wait! Aizawa's voice was sharp. Izuku looked up. Their teacher's dark eyes were glowing a baleful red, his long black hair floating ethereally around his head, and his capture weapon was writhing like a nest of snakes. I erased your quirk, Aizawa stated, his voice a low growl. You tried to use it just now, didn't you? I saw the spark in your eyes. That power you used in the entrance exam. Izuku stared at him, utterly bewildered. The hum inside him hadn't changed. He felt exactly the same. He hadn't tried to use the Aegis. He had just thrown the ball. You did? Izuku asked, his confusion genuine. Aizawa's eyes narrowed, the red glow intensifying. Don't play dumb with me, problem child. It's irritating. He stalked closer, his presence radiating a palpable sense of menace. I have the power to erase the quirks of anyone I look at. It stops them from activating their quirk factor. I just did it to you. So tell me. He leaned in, his voice dangerously quiet. What is your power? The one that doesn't seem to care that it's being erased. The question hung in the air, heavy and impossible. The other students were watching, silent and intrigued. Bakugo's eyes were boring into him, filled with a mixture of suspicion and rage. Izuku's mind raced. He couldn't tell the truth. An ancient spiritual entity chose me to be the guardian of conceptual weapons tied to heroic virtues. He'd be in a padded room before lunch. He had no cover story, no lie prepared. All he had was the truth, or a fragment of it. He met Aizawa's glowing red gaze, his own green eyes wide with a terrified honesty. It's not a quirk, the words came out as a desperate whisper. It was the only explanation he had. Aizawa stared at him for a long, silent moment. The red glow in his eyes faded, and his hair settled back around his shoulders. He blinked, his expression unreadable, a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and a flicker of something else, intrigue. He clearly thought Izuku was being evasive, a smart-mouthed kid with a difficult quirk he was trying to hide. Fine. Aizawa grunted, stepping back. Whatever it is, it's clearly not helping you here. You have one more throw. Don't waste my time. Izuku stepped back into the circle, his body trembling. He'd narrowly avoided disaster, but the core of his problem remained. He was still going to fail. He looked at his hand, then at the ball. He had nothing more to give. No, a voice in his head said, a voice that sounded like Toshinori Yagi. You have a vessel of iron. But what good is a strong vessel without the will to move it? He closed his eyes. He didn't try to summon the Aegis. Instead, he focused on the hum inside him, the source of the Keeper's power. He didn't ask it to manifest. He just drew on its essence, on the feeling of unshakable resolve. He wrapped that feeling around the fear, around the despair, and crushed it. He threw the ball. It wasn't a quirk-powered throw. But it was a throw fueled by 10 months of hell, by the pride of his mentor, and by the sheer, indomitable will to not give up. The ball flew, sailing past his previous mark, landing with a soft thud. Aizawa's device beeped. 74.5 meters. It wasn't spectacular. It didn't break any records. But it was better. It was proof of progress. It was enough. When the final scores were posted, Izuku's name was at the very bottom. 20th place. A cold dread seized him. This was it. By the way, Aizawa said, his back turned to the class as he started to walk away. The expulsion thing was a lie. The silence was absolute, then broken by a collective shriek of disbelief. It was a rational deception to push you to your limits. Aizawa called over his shoulder, not bothering to look back. Izuku slid to the ground, his legs giving out from sheer relief, his body shaking uncontrollably. Aizawa paused at the edge of the field, glancing back at the trembling green-haired boy. It's not a quirk. The words echoed in his mind. A problem child, indeed. One who bore watching very, very closely. I am here! Coming through the door like a normal person. All Might's booming voice preceded him as he burst into the classroom, his costume a riot of primary colors, his smile a force of nature. The mood in the room, still tense from the morning's ordeal, instantly lifted. Welcome to the most important class at UA High. Welcome to Hero Basic Training, he announced. Here you will learn the fundamentals of what it means to be a hero, and for your first lesson. He struck a dramatic pose. We're going to jump right in with this. Combat training. He pressed a button, and panels slid out from the classroom wall, revealing numbered cases. And to go with that, you need these, your very own hero costumes, designed based on your quirk registration forms and your own requests. Get changed, and meet me at ground beta. The locker room was a chaotic mix of excitement and nervous energy. Izuku found his case, number 13. He opened it, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was the costume his mother had so painstakingly sewn for him. It was a simple, full-body teal jumpsuit with white accents, a red belt, and a mask with long, ear-like protrusions designed to emulate All Might's signature hairstyle. It had a respirator-like mouthguard that made him look like he was smiling. Seeing it, holding it, it felt real. His mother had poured all her love and support into every stitch. Wearing it, he didn't feel like Deku, the quirkless kid. He felt like a hero. As they emerged into the light of ground beta, a sprawling mock city, Izuku felt a surge of confidence. Everyone looked incredible, like they had stepped right out of the pages of a comic book. Uraraka's sleek, pink and black spacesuit. Ida's full-body knight armor, complete with exhaust pipes. And Bakugo. His costume was brutally militaristic, a black tank top with orange X's, and enormous, grenade-shaped gauntlets on his forearms. All Might beamed at the assembled students. They say the clothes make the hero, and you all look the part. You look like the next generation of greatness, he explained the exercise. It would be a 2-on-2 indoor battle. One team of heroes, one team of villains. The villains would be guarding a fake nuclear weapon hidden in the building. The heroes had to either capture the villains with special tape or secure the weapon within the time limit. This is a test of strategy and teamwork as much as it is of power, All Might explained, pulling out 2 boxes. Now, let's draw for your teams. The lots were drawn. Izuku watched, his heart pounding. Team A, he looked at his ball. He was paired with Uraraka. A wave of relief washed over him. He knew her, he trusted her. And your opponents will be. All Might reached into the villain box. Team D, consisting of Tenya Ida and Katsuki Bakugo. The world seemed to lurch. Izuku's blood turned to ice. He looked across the crowd and saw Bakugo staring at him. There was no triumph in Bakugo's eyes. No excitement. There was only a cold, murderous rage. His smile was a predatory slash, and the look in his eyes promised nothing but pain. In the observation room, the other students murmured. That's the guy who placed first in the exam versus the guy who placed last. This is gonna be a slaughter. All Might, watching the 2 boys, felt a knot of concern. He knew their history. This wasn't just a training exercise anymore. This was personal. Hero Team A, you have a few minutes to strategize. Villain Team D, head inside and prepare. All Might instructed, his voice a little tighter than before. Uraraka bounced on her heels, trying to stay positive. Wow, we're up against Bakugo-kun. He seems super strong. Do you have a plan, Deku-kun? Izuku was staring at the building, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing a decade of torment. The sneers. The explosions. The nickname Deku. You're just a pebble on the side of the road. But then, he saw something else. He saw a boy with terrified eyes, drowning in sludge. His fear was still there, a cold stone in his gut. But something else was there now, too. The steady, quiet hum of the Keeper's power. The memory of the Aegis holding firm against the god of metal. He was not the same person he was yesterday. He turned to Uraraka, his expression serious. Kaken. Bakugo, he's strong. But he's predictable. His first move will be a direct, frontal assault. He'll come for me, not the objective. He's angry. Angry? Why? Uraraka asked, confused. He thinks I've been lying to him, Izuku said quietly. He thinks I've had a powerful quirk all this time and I've been hiding it. Looking down on him, he pulled out a roll of capture tape. He'll come for me, he repeated, his voice gaining a new, hard edge of determination. So we'll use that. You're our best chance of getting the weapon. Your quirk is perfect for a stealth mission. I'll be the distraction. I'll keep him busy. Uraraka looked at him, at the quiet confidence that had replaced his usual stuttering. But can you handle him? He's so explosive. Izuku looked down at his own gloved hands. He didn't know. But he had to try. I can defend, he said, the words feeling truer than anything he had ever said. I can hold him off. The alarm blared, signaling the start of the match. Izuku and Uraraka slipped into the building, their footsteps quiet in the echoing, empty corridor. The air was thick with tension. He's coming, Izuku whispered. He didn't need to see him. He could feel it, an instinct honed by years of being hunted in schoolyards. They rounded a corner, and the world exploded. Bakugo shot around the opposite corner like a rocket, his hands crackling. He didn't hesitate, didn't speak. He just unleashed a massive right hook explosion aimed directly at Izuku's face. Uraraka! Izuku yelled, shoving her hard into a side alcove. There was no time to think, only to react. The primal will to protect flared within him. Shield! The aegis of the unbroken vow slammed into existence on his forearm, a disc of brilliant, solid gold. He brought it up just in time. The force of the explosion was staggering, a physical blow that felt like being hit by a car. The heat was intense, searing the paint on the walls. Chime. The aegis absorbed the blast, its golden surface rippling. Izuku slid back several feet, his boots leaving black streaks on the linoleum, but he held his ground. The energy from the explosion was shunted harmlessly into the concrete wall beside him, blasting out a chunk of plaster and concrete. The smoke cleared. Bakugo stood there, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and incandescent rage. He had seen the shield at the entrance exam, but he thought it was a fluke, a one-off. To see it again, so solid, so real, so effortlessly negating his all-out attack, it was a profound insult to his very existence. So you do have a quirk, you bastard! Bakugo snarled, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. You've been hiding it all this time. Lying to me. Looking down on me. All these years, you've been laughing at me behind my back, haven't you, Deku? No, Kaken, you're wrong! Izuku protested, his heart aching. It's not what you think. Shut up! Bakugo roared, and lunged again. What followed was not a fight. It was a siege. Bakugo was a relentless storm of fire and fury, his explosions echoing like thunder through the narrow hallways. Izuku was a solitary, unmoving rock in the storm. He didn't attack. He didn't even try. His entire being was focused on one thing, defense. He used the aegis to block, to parry, to deflect. Each blow landed with a resonant chime, the force of Bakugo's rage absorbed and shunted into the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The building around them was being torn apart, but Izuku himself was a point of absolute calm in the center of the destruction. In the observation room, the students were speechless. Whoa, Midoriya is actually holding his own, Kirishima said, his eyes wide. He's not holding his own, he's just defending, Todoroki observed, his voice a flat monotone. Bakugo is attacking recklessly. He's wasting his energy on a target that can't be harmed by his attacks. It's inefficient. All Might watched, his fists clenched, a bead of sweat on his brow. He's using it perfectly, young Midoriya. But this rage. Young Bakugo's rage is beyond what I anticipated. Izuku was being driven back, hallway by hallway. He managed to use the capture tape on Bakugo's leg during a brief opening, but Bakugo blasted it off with a smaller, precise explosion. This was not a training exercise for him. This was an exorcism. I've got eyes on Ida-kun. He's on the 5th floor, north side. Uraraka's voice crackled through his earpiece. He's cleared the room of everything, so I can't use any debris on him. He's playing the villain role perfectly. How are things on your end? A little busy, Izuku grunted, absorbing another blast that sent him skidding into a wall. Just get to the weapon, Uraraka-san, I can handle him, Bakugo laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Handle me? You're not even fighting, you useless coward! All you can do is hide behind your little toy. He raised his right gauntlet, pointing it at Izuku. A small pin near the handle clicked. You know what these are, Deku? As I store up my nitro sweat in these gauntlets, they build up for one massive, concentrated blast. In the observation room, All Might's blood ran cold. Bakugo, my boy, don't do it! You'll kill him! He yelled into the comms. He won't die if he dodges! Bakugo screamed back, a crazed light in his eyes. He was past reason. He pulled the pin. Izuku's eyes widened in horror. He saw the brilliant, blinding light gathering at the mouth of the gauntlet. It was a focused, catastrophic amount of energy. The Aegis was strong, but was it that strong? Even if it held, the force redirected would bring the whole building down on top of them, on top of Uraraka and Ida. A purely defensive solution was no longer an option. A stalemate was a loss. He was in a corner. He couldn't hurt Kaken. He couldn't let Kaken hurt him, or Uraraka, or Ida. He couldn't run. He couldn't hide. He looked at the incandescent rage on Bakugo's face, a mask of fury built to hide a deep, festering insecurity. It was a lie. He looked at his own trembling hands, at the fear coiling in his gut telling him he was still that same helpless child. That was a lie too. He needed something else. Not a wall to hide behind. He needed a tool to dismantle the situation. To cut through the lies. The lie of Kaken's superiority. The lie of his own weakness. The lie that this had to end in violence. His mind went quiet, reaching into the silent, golden space of the Nexus. I need to see the truth. I need to sever the threat without severing the person. The request was clear, precise, and born not of a desire to win, but of a desperate need for a better way. A new hum joined the steady thrum of the Aegis. It was a higher frequency, a clear, crystalline note. From his right hand, which was clenched into a fist, a new light bloomed. It wasn't the warm, solid gold of the Aegis. It was a pure, clean, ethereal white light. It flowed from his knuckles, elongating, sharpening, solidifying into the form of a blade. It was a simple sword, a double-edged arming sword with no cross guard, its hilt seamlessly blending into his gloved hand. It was made of solid, unwavering white light, and it did not radiate heat or menace. It radiated clarity. It didn't feel sharp to the touch. It felt absolute. In his mind, a new name bloomed, delivered on a wave of understanding, the Blade of Verity. Bakugo's howitzer impact erupted from his gauntlet. A massive, concentrated beam of explosive force shot down the hallway, incinerating the air, a roaring dragon of destruction. Izuku did not dodge. He did not brace. He stood his ground, the golden Aegis still humming on his left arm, and with his right, he swung the Blade of Verity. It was a simple, downward arc. Not a warrior's frantic slash, but a gesture as calm and decisive as a judge's gavel. The blade of pure white light met the torrent of explosive energy. There was no impact. No explosion. No sound. The Blade of Verity passed through the metal of Bakugo's gauntlet as if it were a ghost, not even leaving a scratch. Bakugo felt nothing. No pain, no resistance. But the effect was immediate and reality-shattering. The roaring dragon of fire and force simply unraveled. The explosion, a complex chemical reaction fueled by nitroglycerin and intent, was severed from its own concept. The energy, the heat, the concussive force, it all just fizzled, collapsing in on itself and vanishing into a harmless puff of warm, inert gas that smelled faintly of caramel. The hallway was suddenly silent. Bakugo was frozen, his arm outstretched, his gauntlet smoking slightly. He stared, his mind unable to process what had just happened. His ultimate move, his rage, his power, his very identity given form, and it had vanished. Not blocked, not deflected. It had been unmade. It was a violation of every law of physics, a rejection of his entire worldview. He was left standing there, arm outstretched, a posturing fool whose god-killing weapon had just fired a blank. "Uraraka-san, now!" Izuku screamed into his comms. The momentary, absolute shock was all the opening they needed. High above, Uraraka, who had been hiding near the ceiling, touched the massive concrete pillar that Ida had declared the weapon's last line of defense. Making it weightless, she swung it like a baseball bat. "Comet home run!" she yelled. The pillar, though weightless, still had mass. It sent a shower of concrete debris flying at Ida, who was too busy monologuing about his villainous role to react in time. While he was distracted, Uraraka floated over his head and triumphantly wrapped her arms around the nuclear weapon. "I've got it! I've got the weapon!" she cried. A loud buzzer echoed through the building. "The hero team wins!" All Might's voice, strained and full of disbelief, announced over the speakers. Down in the ravaged hallway, Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The blade of Verity in his hand dissolved into motes of white light, fading into nothing. The aegis on his other arm followed suit. He was left standing there, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline, his arms empty. He looked at Bakugo. The rage had drained from his rival's face, replaced by a pale, trembling confusion. Bakugo was staring at his own gauntlet, then at Izuku, then back again. For the first time in his life, he had encountered a problem he couldn't blast his way through. He had encountered a power that didn't play by his rules. He had been utterly, incomprehensibly, and humiliatingly defeated without so much as a scratch being laid on him. Izuku took a shaky step forward. "Kaken!" Bakugo flinched back as if he'd been struck. He didn't say a word. He just turned and began to walk away, his shoulders stiff, his head bowed. In the observation room, there was a stunned, complete silence. The students stared at the monitor, their minds struggling to catch up. They had just watched a boy with a shield and a phantom sword defeat the most powerful student in their class without throwing a single punch. What the hell was that?" Kaminari finally whispered, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "That second quirk, a nullification blade?" Yayorozu murmured, her brow furrowed in deep analytical thought. "But to nullify an explosion of that magnitude, the energy has to go somewhere. It violates the laws of conservation of energy." "It's impossible." Todoroki said nothing, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on Izuku's image on the screen. He had seen power. He had seen skill. This was something else. This was an anomaly. A variable he could not account for. All Might stood apart from them, his trademark smile gone. He looked down at his own hands. He had seen the blade appear. He had felt the shift in the air, even through the monitors. One for all was a power to be passed on. It was physical, immense, a stockpile of strength. What he had just witnessed was metaphysical. It was conceptual. "It's not a quirk." The boy's words to Aizawa came back to him. He was beginning to believe it. Izuku met Uraraka and Ida outside the building. Uraraka was cheering, Ida was lamenting his failure as a villain, and Izuku could only offer a weak, tired smile. He looked back at the building, at the hallway where he had faced down his past. He hadn't won by being stronger. He hadn't won by being faster. He had won by being different. He had faced the bully, the specter that had haunted his entire childhood, and with a blade made of truth, he had begun to cut the strings. The fear was still there, but it no longer had the same power over him. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was the keeper. And he had two weapons now.